Good morning, everyone. They're just waiting for one or two people to get in. And thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good to see you all on a slightly cloudy Monday morning here. So welcome to it's the third technical briefing, but the second key subject that we're dealing with, which is dealing with the retrofit supply chain. I'm just waiting for a couple more people to join us. It's never easy trying to be the host and the facilitator at the same time. So bear with me. John, I'm just making you co-host. So if you could just let anybody in if
Sure.
I don't see it, thanks.
Yes, cheers. That's right.
Okay, so we'll make a start. So good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Bob. I'm an associate for SHAP, Sustainable Housing Action Partnership. We're working with Sustainability West Midlands and Contented with the LGA to deliver these series of programs aimed to share information across local authorities, to have some technical briefings in terms of particular themes that came out of the previous LGA retrofit program, and then to work with you all in regional groupings of local authorities to go through some of that sort of space where you can share ideas, share best practice, and talk about some of the challenges that you experience in a very, very safe space. Very pleased to welcome three very good speakers this morning that I think are going to give you a lot of information about their experiences. We have Jonathan Morris from Essex County Council, who's going to start the programme from a local authority perspective about talking about his and his team's experience. We then move to Carl Yale from Lovell, who's a very large construction company, been delivering retrofit programs for a long, long time. Carl's going to talk about his perspective of being on the other end of that supply chain. And then we finish with Mark Cook, who's a partner with Anthony Collins Solicitors, who does a lot of work with local authorities on enabling them to deliver more effectively, and particularly about procurement. And we do hear time and time again that procurement is a real barrier to the effective delivery of retrofit. So we're looking at a program that probably will finish at sort of about maybe about 11:15. We've got 15-20 minutes for each of the speakers. Time for short questions at the end of each speaker, and then we'll have a general panel Q&A at the end of that session. So if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the chat as you go along, and then we'll pick them up after each speaker, and then we'll have a session for the final Q&As at the very, very end. So with that, no further ado, very happy to welcome Jonathan Morris, who's going to talk about his experience, first of all, from Essex County Council.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. And Richard, would you be able to give me the power to present slides, please?
You should now, thank you.
Otherwise, it will be a long session for everyone with me describing pictures. So, can you see the slides okay?
Not yet.
Okay.
Now they're coming up, yeah.
So you've got the first slide up.
Yes, can see it now, thank you.
Perfect. So I'm going to quickly go through kind of Essex County Council's kind of perspective of working with the supply chain. My role at Essex is I am a Climate Action Programme Officer, and I've been tasked with coming up with the retrofit strategy and action plan for ECC. Kind of we're relatively new in the space as a county council. We don't own any of our own housing stock, and so we're kind of looking to see how we can deliver retrofit as kind of with the districts and kind of influence residents. We also don't have so far we don't have a historic relationship with much of the supply chain, as where we do get money from central government, so your Green Homes grants, your LAD funding, that's all allocated or delivered by our local net zero hub. So that means that kind of the supply chain relationships are kind of handled kind of one step away from us when we get our kind of funding. But kind of, we're very keen to get into space. There's a lot of benefits, which I'll be rattling through. And also kind of, I'll go through some of what we're thinking of doing next as well, to try and kind of share that with you all. So the reason why we're keen to do retrofit is both my team, who are looking to do the decarbonisation of homes, and Loretta, who was going to do this talk for you in sector development, see there's a lot of opportunity, both in terms of helping the county reach net zero and economically. So kind of there's jobs kind of across kind of the spectrum, kind of estimated even up to 18,000, kind of through that, although that includes transport and other things. Retrofit and kind of decarbonising heating is a key part of that. And kind of some of our modelling suggests there's an economic opportunity of around 15 billion just for kind of getting properties to net zero standard. And that's on the low side as well, kind of once you consider kind of the challenge as a county as a whole. Kind of it's the benefits kind of go across the spectrum, kind of from saving money and kind of your bills, which is obviously kind of a key issue at the moment for households, to kind of improving the quality of the homes people are living in, and kind of the health issues that kind of bad housing can cause. Obviously kind of improves kind of communities, and kind of reduces kind of greenhouse gases whilst producing jobs. So kind of the benefits are across the section. And then when we look at the social value, so kind of there's both jobs, there's kind of could be worth 227 million. All the jobs to do retrofit in Essex are in Essex. And that's in fact one of our key challenges with the supply chain, is being a county that's so close to London. Kind of, if we do manage to upskill the supply chain, we've got to consider that kind of London's a very attractive market. So kind of where the jobs are will also mean, if regardless of how many people we train up, we might still not have the supply chain in place to actually deliver retrofits at the scale in Essex at the pace required to reach net zero. And there's also kind of the social value for whole house, that kind of a social value return of about 2.9 billion per year, kind of if we are doing the kind of whole Essex housing stock, which in just the area that ECC oversees is around 640,000 odd. Kind of the bad sides of not retrofitting are kind of, it has really bad impacts on kind of like elderly and vulnerable people, and that kind of that has a cost that goes on to the NHS for treating people who are living in bad quality homes. And again, that's obviously a pressing issue right now as we're going into the winter. And if the mild weather doesn't hold, it's going to be a real issue. And it's reckoned, though, that for every £1 spent on reducing fuel poverty, there's a return of 42 pence to the NHS. And there's an example there of kind of how a programme in Germany has managed to kind of return money to the government through investing in retrofit. So kind of, there's a good economic argument for it as well. So the current state of play in Essex, kind of, as I say, we've got 640,000 homes just in the districts that Essex oversees. Just to kind of let you know, Southend and Thurrock are two districts which have their own unitary council, so aren't in there. So that's why we talk about a difference between Essex as a whole and the areas ECC overseas. As per the rest of the country, the majority of our properties are below EPC-D. And the most common types we have are semi-detached houses, and most popular heating sources are gas. So there's a lot to kind of do in terms of decarbonisation. All of this is from some work that we had Parity Projects do for us, the Modern People and their sister company to Retrofit Works. And that was for a project which I'll talk a bit more about later. But kind of, they're one of the key players that we've been engaging in terms of kind of professionals in the supply chain in retrofit. And so kind of that's one of the relationships we're built as part of this project and are hoping to build on for the future. So kind of our work as we've been going through is kind of obviously been pulling out the barriers, and so why isn't the retrofit happening in Essex when there's all those benefits that are kind of gone on for. In terms of the supply chain, it's all around kind of confidence has been undermined by the government stopping funding. So companies who have kind of ramped up their capacity to deliver government funding, and then when that's been withdrawn, means that either those companies had to lay off staff, or worse, have gone bankrupt. So kind of there isn't the confidence in that sector in order for them to actually kind of invest in building that. And that in turn kind of leads to a virtuous circle that there isn't a lot of demand for domestic retrofit, kind of as it's not the norm just yet. But that means households who do want to do retrofit can't find installers. And so kind of it's currently kind of stuck in a cycle, which we're hoping to try and actually kind of overcome for our work. So in terms of just some examples of our collaboration with the supply chain, key one where we've been trying to address the kind of one of the big kind of market failures is around trying to get the supply chain upskilled to the PAS 2035 standards. And in particular, the roles around the retrofit assessor and retrofit coordinator. So what we used the Community Renewal Fund to target 2 of the more deprived districts in Essex, Harlow and Tendring, with the idea of trying to upskill people to try and give them good long-term jobs and also help drive retrofits, which, as we say, we've seen as kind of a key driver to the Essex economy. So this we did in partnership with the Retrofit Academy, who are one of the leaders in terms of actually training people and have come up with these courses to kind of align to the new PAS standards. And it came up with a packages of training from a level 2, which required no kind of background in retrofit at all, and was an online course with a day session to clear up queries and test, up to a level 5, which was the retrofit coordinator, with the idea being that creating entry-level ones, albeit not kind of not a direct qualification to work in the PAS framework, but kind of start people off on the journey so they could kind of get upskilled. It also provided what's called fit for retrofit training to the social housing providers in Essex, in order to get them up to speed on exactly what's involved in retrofit and how they should be engaging kind of the supply chain and building relationships when they're delivering retrofit projects across their stock. And it did also fund that stock condition report I was just showed you some of the highlights from parity projects, which has meant that kind of we've been able to share that with all the districts who have, so they can kind of plan what they're doing with any of their housing stock, and also means that ECC as a whole can kind of apply a more strategic approach to understanding kind of where best we should be targeting future government funding and how we can kind of tailor any offering to the self-funded sector in the future. So just in terms of where we are on that journey, we've been allocated around 25 million from the Green Homes Grant and LAD schemes. That's slightly kind of those funds are being reallocated owing to issues of it actually being spent in the timeframes Bayes set. And we are trying to lobby Bayes for kind of longer term, less kind of harsh deadlines in order to try and actually deliver retrofit in the county. We also coordinated a bid for the first round of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which, although not having any houses ourselves, it needed to be led by a local authority. So we worked with a couple of housing associations to get the first round in, and we're working with more to kind of get another bid in, although we're not actually leading that. House stock analysis, and we have some business support programs and retrofit professional skills training, which part of that's the CRF, but also we've got what was funded through the EU Locase, which provides energy efficiency advice to local businesses, and that includes the supply chain on retrofit, and they can get up to £10,000 to kind of do decarbonisation projects. As it's EU funded, sadly, it's finishing next year, but we tried to talk about how ECC can offer at least some of that service going forward, or how best to try and support businesses once that avenue of support is kind of withdrawn. We've obviously got our own estate to retrofit, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. And we also have our All Homes Essex website, which is trying to coordinate all the advice to residents on kind of how to access funds and how to work with citizens' advice and such like. So I'll go into more detail on this on the next slide, but the key question has been, what role should ECC play? As I say, we don't have a historic relationship with the supply chain, and we don't have any housing stock of our own to kind of chuck in the mix. So it's kind of, we're looking to act as a facilitator through using the government funding and any future ones, a coordinator to try and create an ecosystem where retrofit is the norm for their work, and a provider where we use our own stock and partners to try and create more supply, so the supply chain has confidence that there's a big kind of market for them to kind of upskill for, whilst kind of we also try and encourage the domestic sector to uptake. So this just kind of lays it out in slightly more detail. I won't talk through it again, but I suppose just the key thing is it's just trying to come up with this strategic and holistic role for ECC, so we can try and address the market failure on the kind of the supply and demand side. So just our next steps, which is that last one. We're looking to try and commission some research with one of the companies who do a one-stop shop to try and work out the feasibility of what would we need to do to have such an offering in Essex. So kind of what them engage with the supply chain to find out kind of where they are, what they need to have confidence to invest, engage with residents to likewise, and then to see whether kind of how best for us to try and facilitate a retrofit offering for the county. We're looking to utilise all the government funding, and that includes Eco4, which we're hoping we'll be able to utilise and address the issues of the supply chain having to start and stop a lot by having funding for what's now 3.5 years because of the delays in it getting going, but still kind of a longer term funding pot than say normal competition, which is kind of get the bid in now, get it spent by next April, and kind of not kind of addressing the actual practicalities and complications of delivering retrofit projects on the ground. We have a bid in at the moment to base to replicate that CRF project even in 3 more districts in Essex through their home skills decarbonisation competition. That will look to basically run the training again, and also it will help us. We're hoping to use a hub and spoke training approach where, as we have the relationship with the Retrofit Academy through this CRF, and kind of get the Essex colleges, which are part of Essex County Council, as their kind of hubs, and then get other colleges in Essex to deliver retrofit training. And that's kind of, we're hoping to do that because historically the colleges have turned around and said that they're not too keen to do retrofit training because they get paid per student, and where students aren't interested in doing retrofit, they don't get paid to have empty classrooms essentially. So we're trying to kind of encourage it and use some of this government funding to get it up and running, and then for them to kind of demonstrate the benefits of providing training as part of their suite of learning. We are talking to, we call them our anchor institutions such as the NHS, the local universities, the local councils, to try and work out an approach where to see if it's feasible to, where we need to retrofit our own buildings, whether we can actually kind of make it into smaller chunks rather than just a big, say, £10 million retrofit project. And if we're doing that, we're hoping, as Essex is predominantly a county of small to medium-sized businesses, kind of that they can, that will make it more appealing to them to actually bid and to try and do the work. As currently, if it's a big project, only a big kind of contractor is going to want to bid in to do it. So we're hoping to try and open up the market a bit and make it more accessible. And finally, all of the above is being combined into our domestic retrofit strategy and action plan, which I am in the process of finalising, kind of as not as we speak, but I would be if I wasn't talking to you all now. And that is going to try and be our kind of coordinated and strategic approach where we use all of those drivers and levers to actually kind of get retrofit happening in the county so that we can actually meet net zero and help households as part of the cost of living crisis. And that is me done slides wise. So I shall stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think it's very interesting how you described your need to create a very specific role for your local authority according to your particular needs and issues and constraints in your area. I think that's quite an interesting process. Your comments about stop-start approach to funding makes it difficult to get contractors, and the challenges around training agencies, I think, is a message that we hear constantly. So I think that's certainly a difficult one. We have a comment come question from Cara. Cara, do you want to ask that question in terms of how you want to share training offers?
Thanks, I'll try. Sorry, a bit unstable internet today. Yes, thank you very much. Really inspiring to see this kind of work happening in other councils across the country. We in Somerset did a collaboration project for a very shortly funded community renewal fund to help accelerate retrofit in Somerset. One of the, obviously, reiterate what we said, obviously one of the barriers is how can you get more contractors on board to support our communities to deliver that work once they've got retrofit plans done. We engaged an organisation who I thought were quite proactive in this area, but the package that they provided for contractors didn't really seem to hit home for them to really do the training in the timescale that was required, and we understand that contractors are very busy. So it'd be really interesting to see what others are doing in order to engage, particularly around education, higher education establishments, as well as maybe some of the contractors themselves who've got workshops or some of the supply chain. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you and whether your solution could be similarly adapted to other councils across the country. That would be really great. Is it, and also to understand, is it applied learning as opposed to online, which obviously in my mind now, having given that option, isn't really going to deliver necessarily the outcome of more involved retrofit?
I think we probably had the same partner as Essex. I think Retrofit Academy did Essex and Somerset kind of as a very similar project with the Community Renewal Fund. And I think one of the lessons out of that was that it seemed quite kind of the uptake of some courses was a lot higher than others. And in fact, kind of the engagement, we had a lot of people register for the entry one and not that many people actually complete it. So I think we faced similar challenges. And in fact, we're trying to use the lessons from that as a pilot for the next round to try and see how best to actually engage people. I think it sounds like we had a very similar approach, and we'd be kind of more than happy to share kind of our learning from it to kind of so others can kind of learn from it and build from that. But I think it is still a key challenge kind of as we try these as trials and pilots.
One aspect that we want to produce from this is just a repository of information from everybody during all the sessions. I think we'll make sure, I think it seems absolutely critical. The issue about training seems to be particularly challenging. And we're going to hear from Carl in a minute about this from a contractor supply chain.
I can see Danny's got a hand up there, Richard.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think there's some issues we need to absolutely share there. So thank you very much, Carl, for bringing that, and John for maybe being able to provide some direct experience of that as well. Danny from Hampshire.
Yeah, hi, thanks. And thanks, Jonathan, for talking us through what you're doing in Essex. I recognise the graphics from the Parity Projects report, which we've also had. A few things, I suppose, and kind of around the supply chain. And one thing that we learned from our Parity Projects report around the skills needed, and you said, I think your slide said 18,000 green jobs. I'm not quite sure how you've defined it in this case, but I suppose the bulk of the demand is actually going to fall on kind of general builders and kind of not specialist skills providers like heat pump installers or insulation specialists necessarily, but there'll just be a huge demand for general trades people. So I think that's a point worth emphasizing when we speak about this, because green jobs are not necessarily specialist, they're just can be quite general. And I guess a question would be around, you're obviously engaged to some extent with the supply chain and also with the training providers, but I think what we're trying to do, and our skills team at Hampshire is working on this side of it, is engage with the employers in order to present that package to the training providers and say, look, employers are ready and looking to hire people, you need to train them, because like you said, training providers are not willing to provide courses for something that they don't necessarily see as having an end goal for potential students. So I'd be interested if you've tried to make that connection as well. And just finally, to kind of answer one of Cara's points, we're continuing to work with parity projects following the report, and they've taken us through 6 months of guiding kind of engagement, and we've used their contacts with the supply chain we've had 2 or 3 sessions with SMEs and local tradespeople to just talk about what they would like to see, what kind of scheme might work for them in Hampshire, because that is the most challenging thing, I think. It's like you both alluded to, that there's they've already got a lot of work on, so it's about trying to figure out what would make this appealing to them as well. So a few points.
That link from training to industry has been kind of a challenge, and I think especially, as you say, kind of where the supply chain is so busy. And in fact, one of the findings that we found was putting off the small to medium businesses is that under the new PAS standards, to do the work, you essentially need to do a course that's equivalent to an MVQ. And if you're busy working, the last thing you want to do is kind of that level of kind of training to take time out of your working day when you could be earning money for it. So it's kind of, I think our idea of success is very much your idea that kind of it's normal builders who do the work, that kind of we're not set retrofit should become the norm. So it's not this kind of big new scary thing that suddenly everyone needs new jobs for. It is kind of, it's the same as sorting out your new windows or doors or kind of putting a new kitchen in. Kind of, it's just something you want to do to your house. So trying to link the two has been challenging, but I think we've been able to use government money and do the pilots to demonstrate kind of this, you have to kind of to get some training and to show that those people, there's a demand for jobs. I think that has helped us with the colleges. And then we're looking to do very similar exercise with parity retrofit works around kind of that engagement piece as well, which I think once we're kind of able to scope out our feasibility and kind of can then talk about, here's the huge economic opportunity, here are the kind of steps that we think kind of to take. I think that will really help us when we talk to industry, and then that will kind of close the loop to get kind of the training colleges on board as well.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's very interesting to hear your approach and your ambition, I think, as well, in terms of the County Council and the scale at which you aim to do that. So thank you very much for your presentation. If you could have your slides later, we'll share them with the participants as well. So thank you very much for your time today. And if you could wait, there might be some questions at the very end of the session as well. So I think that makes a very good link into Carl Yale from Lovell, who is in the supply chain and has been working on these issues for a long number of years. And we can hear from Carl from his perspective, his challenges, and how he has suggestions on how engaging with the supply chain can be more effective. Thanks, Carl.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. I've got some slides. Just let me know when it's on.
They're just coming up now, Carl.
Fabulous.
They're coming up. They're not in presenter mode at the moment.
Yeah.
They are now. Thank you.
Fabulous. So thank you all. I'm coming from a contractor's perspective. I'll whittle through some of the early stuff which may overlap with Jonathan's, but really I wanted just to put a contractor's point of view on, just to say, what makes a good client, what makes your retrofit project more attractive to the installers, really, just to give you some some lessons learned from our journey so far. We've been doing retrofit for years under different guises, CESP, CERT, ECO, but retrofit now is very different. And the introduction of PAS 2030, the PAS 2035, has made a big difference, and it's made it a lot of new acronyms. I was reading on holiday last week football cliches, and I think you could do your own retrofit book of cliches, to be honest, because there's lots of new acronyms to learn and lots of new terminology. But there's a big focus now on fabric first and doing your worst stock first, and which is great, hard to treat, but also with the timescales that we've got and the funding we've got and the limited resource we've got, we're also making these jobs even more difficult to deliver. So really, part of what I want to get out today is, when you're looking at your plans and as stockholders, are you getting the right mix, and are you putting together the right programs? We all know about airtight and ventilate right and no regrets policies and soft landings and unintended outcomes. And I did my fast track retrofit coordinator course earlier this year just because I wanted to increase my knowledge and understanding. It's a great course, but it's not for everybody. So I think the big part of the training is picking the right training for the people, and that's your own teams, my teams as contractors, and training for installers. There's a lot of knowledge to be learned, but nothing beats actually doing the job. Lots of new terminologies around PBs and WOOFIs and SIP models, and this retrofit has got very complicated now, very complicated with a lot of building physics involved, and we're in this process at the minute with a lot of academic people coming in, and we also need practical solutions, cost-effective solutions, deliverable solutions to make these jobs deliverable and affordable. A few barriers, you know most of these, but I'll just quickly whirl through to set the scene. Past 2035 is very complicated. It's good, the standards there, the intentions are excellent, but it's complicated. Retrofit is expensive. There are limited skills and capacities at all levels, and we touched on it then in the last presentation, and Danny, I think it was Danny picked up on as well. It's not just green jobs. There's energy assessors, there's coordinators, there's designers, there's building physics, there's energy modelers. Then we've got the trades, and people like ground workers and window fitters and roofers. These are really key trades, plasterers that we need, and they're hard to find at the moment because there's work out there. There's lots of new build work out there, and this work is bitty at the moment because there's trying to get scale and pace. It's bitty. Retrofit is disruptive for residents, and there's big issues and concerns around quality and trust. So I'm just going to sort of tip into these individually. I'm sure you've had a flick through past 2035 now. It is complicated, but the intentions are excellent. But what we found is it details what is required, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. And therefore, a lot of the challenges we've had and lessons learned is interpretation of PAS. And what I believe PAS requires is different to what the building physics person requires, what the client, what the installer, and at the minute we're spending a lot of time having debates and committee meetings around interpretations of PAS and what should be included in a pre-inspection building survey, what should be included in a retrofit design, what should be included in a survey, a type 3 survey. What is path C? What is a path B? So there's a lot of interpretation, and that's slowing down things, and therefore leading to inconsistent approaches. Again, across all levels of retrofit, we're finding there's good and bad designers, there's good and bad coordinators, there's good and bad installers, and we're spending the last 18 months following our demonstrator scheme, literally, sorting out who's good and who's bad and who's worth working with and who we need to be, because it's very new, it's very inconsistent. Of course, you find a good designer, a good coordinator, a good installer, and everybody wants a bit of them. So then there's the capacity and the resource issues. And PAS is very much written for one-off properties. You do the retrofit coordinator course, it's you with a homeowner rather than a large stockholder. So therefore, when you're trying to do large-scale retrofit, it's different to do all that stuff to 100 properties or 200 properties or 300 properties. It's a bit. It needs to be rationalised, and we require practical solutions. We've had experience of having very, very academic, clever people. Don't get me wrong, who are passive house enthusiasts, but you're never going to achieve these sorts of details in an occupied social house at scale. We've got to be realistic about what we can achieve and what levels of air tightness can we achieve. People living in these houses, we can't rip off skirting boards and reseal. Can't empty lofts to seal up all the holes around light fittings. We've got to do what's reasonable and practical. We know it's expensive. There's market volatility is a big turnoff at the moment for trying to get people for us to price work and to get our supply chain to price. There's a lot of risk, and if clients want fixed price jobs, who's taking the risk? And it's a big turnoff and a big concern. The supply chain is limited. There's a lack of competition. And it's a bit of a harsh word, but some of these installers are mercenaries and there's no loyalty. If someone up the road is paying £2 a metre more on render, God, without any warning, and we're left there holding the baby trying to keep the supply chain on side. We've had issues around Brexit and COVID. it's not just material costs, it's also labour. You know, some of the good EWI installers are Eastern European guys, and they've gone, and to try and get them back. When they do come back, you know, have they got CSCS cards? Have they got MVQs? Can they speak English? You know, there's lots of other things that we need to think of as a contractor to make sure that they're ready to work on sites. We know about rising energy costs, which is having more impact on pricing. The biggest issue for us, and what I really emphasise today, is lack of funding, lack of long-term funding, lack of commitment, and these unrealistic delivery periods, because we're just creating boom and bust scenarios time, whether it's CESP, CERT, ECO, that, you know, Uni Green Deal, HUG, Green Homes grants, they're here today and gone tomorrow. And there's a small pool of agile opportunists that sort of make a meal out of it for everyone else. You know, unless you're a quick catcher-upper, by the time you've got up to speed, the policy's changed, the funding's ended, and now we find that now SHGF wave 1 and into wave 2, there's a race to the end of March, and these schemes just don't start soon enough. You know, and by the time you've got procurement and you've mobilised and you've done all your technical surveys, you tend to be doing wet trades in the winter, and they're just not deliverable. And of course, the cost of these deep retrofits, 30, 40, 50k property, very expensive. And a lot of our clients are saying we can't afford it, and we've got rent caps, and our income is based on rent. You know, so why should I spend 30 grand on a property if I can't charge any more for the rent? So there are these barriers. And in terms of skill shortage, there is just no. We need a pipeline, and for us to go and train people and invest in training and invest in accreditations and encourage supply chain to invest, then they need the pipeline, because there's other work out there, other work that's more stable, you know, domestic work, new build work, whereas this is, we've all been bitten once or twice in the past, you know, for different things, chasing accreditations, spending money on IT systems and training, to find that it's been a U-turn. Often some of these projects, you know, that they want to wave 1 scheme's got delivered in 12 months. How can you take on an NVQ loft or cavity installer? You know, they most trades you need 2 years to do the course. So we wouldn't take somebody on knowing that there's no work to fulfil. So we've got to really give long-term funding and long-term commitment for us to have the confidence to take people on and offer them the job at the end of it. And let's be fair, some of these jobs aren't very sexy or aspirational. And it's not just air source heat pump technicians and installers, it's lofts and cavities, it's window fitters, it's ground workers, it's fencers, you know, it's electricians, it's plumbers, doing rainwater goods and soil stack moving. It's a lot of bitty work. We need people, but how do we make it sexy and aspirational? It's difficult. And whereas a lot of training, MVQ training, is based in carpentry, bricklayers, the new build trades. We're trying to develop our own Lovell Retrofit Academy here in conjunction with Moby. And it's exciting. It's also challenging because we know the job's needed. How do you find the people out of school and you know, bring them into retrofit? You know, and offer them, you know, offer them the opportunity that they desire. Who wants to be a loft insulator, really? What we do find, a lot of the supply chain who are out there doing it are smaller SMEs, and say opportunists. But as a larger organisation, could you trust an SME to do these big schemes, or do you need a bigger contractor? Therefore, you know, we need to try and break the barriers where we're creating the jobs, and sometimes it might just be through partnerships with SMEs and training centres is where we find these opportunities. Big barrier here is sort of over the skills is the disruption for residents. So are residents engaged? Do they want to retrofit? Do they understand what's involved in a retrofit? One of the terminologies that we hear quite a lot is it retrofit in one go, or is it a step-by-step retrofit? And that's something that clients really need to understand. And we've heard about Parity a few times this morning, which is a great tool. There's Driam, there's Saba. But I think clients need to understand their stock first, understand the stock, and then build a strategy. And you need to start with the end in mind, because how can you come up with a retrofit plan if you don't know quality of your stock or how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take? And then one good thing about PAS is the introduction of medium-term improvement plans. Rather than doing a 50 grand retrofit in one go, let's start aligning stock data with your investment plans and doing a step-by-step retrofit and using trigger points. So, the fact waiting for the boiler to break, what do? Do you just replace the boiler again? Well, that's probably not. It's a very short-term view. Whereas if we can start getting retrofit ready, when replacing the roof, we can extend the eaves. Should we put PV on at the same time and utilise the scaffold costs? So we could be a lot smarter about this. But one of the problems we find as a contractor is client stock data is poor. Okay, and one of the big challenges is quality and trust. Past 2035 requires well-designed retrofits focusing on airtightness, good designs, interfaces, junctions, installation continuity, thermal bridges. It's really techie stuff, and it's good that some of our site managers will understand it, some of your team will understand it. Obviously, the coordinator and designer needs to, but we need the installers to understand this. And some of these guys are just doing EWI or just doing Windows. It's the connectivity and junctions of different measures that's where the training is needed. And that doesn't have to be a course, it's just understanding the detail, the devil's in the detail, and the installers understand the interfaces, because that's where good detailing and good installs and good quality installs will happen. So it doesn't all have to be formal training. So this we've talked about, so I won't go through it again, but we mustn't overlook the administrative burden of PAS. And this is a big turn-off for a lot of our installers. They don't want to do past 2035 or past 2030-19 because it's too much of an administrative burden. The amount of admin is disproportionate to the work you're doing. The photographs, the surveys, the checklists, and the amount of compliance that goes in afterwards is heavy. And therefore, we're investing in IT systems at the minute because we know that our current systems that deliver large-scale plan maintenance are not fit for purpose for what retrofit requires. And so I think also you just need to think about when you are picking your partners is, will the installer be around in 5 years' time? Because if there is a quality issue, who do you go to? Who's the one carrying the liability? I'm just going to say PAS is convoluted, and I've done my level 5 course. Great, it's a good course. Do I want to be a coordinator? No, but we understand it. There's a lot of coordinators there that are coming to the market that have once been energy assessors, have done home information packs. Now all of a sudden they want to be coordinators. Coordinator is a key role in PAS, but not everybody has got the experience to work in contracting in occupied homes. There's a lot of other factors that aren't covered in the course that are real. And one of the big recommendations for me was to get your own team in house where you don't have to be the coordinator, but understand the course and understand what's involved, because some of your own housing teams know your stock more intimately than anybody else. They know your customers, and if they can understand retrofit more, then you will have more success in your journey. And we've got to move away from, we've got to improve the stock data. So SAVA and the parity stuff is a good indication. It's all based on EPC data, and EPC data is poor. We could have 3 EPCs taken on the same house, and you'd probably get different outcomes. Which is so. When we use this modelling software, it's a great indicator to start. We need to throw the stock assessment data in the bin, and we need to do proper retrofit assessments. Really focus on retrofit rather than just the asset data that you've probably already got, which is about kitchens, bathrooms, and roofing data. I just now want to talk about some more specific things about how to make retrofit more engaging and better for supply chain. And this is both contractors, installers, and so how accurate is your data? And has the property's been assessed? We're talking to clients now, and they say, yes, Lovell, crack on. We want a full turnkey solution from you. And the amount, there's so much work to do before you can start on site in terms of assessing the stock and understanding the measures and costing it up. And I don't think people are realizing how much work is needed up front. So you need a strategy. You need to understand your stock. and you must start with the end in mind. And when we did SHDF demonstrator, the outcome, the intended outcome was we need to get to heat demand of 50 kilowatt hours per meter squared per annum, and that's quite new terminology at the time. Now we're finding through, because it's too expensive and too hard, then okay, well, let's relax it to 90 kilowatt hours, and now we're finding actually 90 kilowatt hours if you can, but let's just do an EPCC. Well, okay, so what does that mean? We're just going to race now and just get the D's to C's, and then what? So we're just pushing the problem down the road for 2031. So okay, the speaker Mark is going to talk about procurement, but when you are putting out your tenders, just think about what sort of contractor do you want, what sort of contract terms are going to be, how is it going to be priced? Do you have the details already in place, or is it just generic schedule of rates? The amount of times we're pricing work now and with details that haven't been agreed, so you're pricing something that you know is going to change, which doesn't help anybody, because we know we need to try and fix the scope up a little bit so we can pick the right supply chain and get the right installers on site. Some of the 10 documents is poor because they haven't appointed a designer. It's just generic measures. So again, we're seeing at the moment cavity walls are already got cavity insulation, and we're EWI in them, which is good in terms of air tightness, but it's costly. And we need to get EWI, external wall insulation, off the critical path, because that is the probably single most measure that's troublesome. It's a wet trade. It's a skill. It's something that's going to take 2 years plus to get an MVQ, reliant on foreign labour to come and do it for us. So how do we make how can we do all the fabric first measures, but without necessarily doing EWI unless you have to? So things like IWI, cavities. Let's do the simple measures better than and doing EWI when you absolutely need to. You also need to make sure you're choosing the right stock. It talks about worst first, fabric first, hard to treat. But if we've got a program of 200 really difficult, challenging properties with structural issues and everything else, to try and deliver this in the tight deadlines is going to be almost impossible. And where is your stock? Is it street by street, or is it pepper potted? And do people want to be picking up, moving? It's harder to supervise, hard to get the quality, it's harder to store materials. So think about making your program deliverable and then more attractive. Think about your specification, because sometimes you might be hoodwinked into a particular specification because of a salesperson, but before you realise, there's only a small number of accredited installers. It's a specialist finish, the specialist licensing around. And before you know it, you're making that job even more difficult to deliver because you're fishing in a smaller pond. Talked about timescales. Don't underestimate the mobilisation phase and the design phase. And then all of a sudden we're doing EWI in the winter, straddled over a Christmas break in the cold and the wet and the dark. Clients need to understand the funding conditions as well. We've got these BASE milestones, but is it based on measures? Is it based on spend? And the amount of clients that don't really understand it. It's difficult because if we've got to deliver a program, we need to understand what the conditionalities around the funding so that we can deliver a successful scheme. And clients come to us with schemes, but they haven't done planning, they haven't got building control, they haven't done technical surveys, they haven't done utility diversions. We've got loads of challenges then around lean-tos, conservatories, bay windows, and this is what slows the job down, makes the job more difficult to do. And again, we keep talking about green jobs, but some of this, is just general building work, and that's probably for us is where the bottleneck is, the enabling works, the roofline extensions, the scaffolding, because this work is bitty, whereas you can go to new build and it's a nice, there's more to go at, probably better rates. And tenants sent to us, we don't want to do a retrofit to them, we want to do a retrofit with them, is our saying. But are they ready? Are they warmed up? Because we've spent a lot of time doing assessment surveys, designs for them to drop out at the 12th hour because they've changed their mind. We have to start the whole process again. It's not like a kitchen and a bathroom where we can, we can quickly move properties up and down the running order. This is very specific, and it's not archetype based, which is another red herring. Each design is unique to that property. So issues around leaseholders, party walls, refusals are really detrimental to a project. And as a client, have you got the team? Have you got the resources to help? Because there'll be some very a lot of knowledge in your teams that really could do with upskilling. And these are some of the challenges that we have. We've gone to some clients and they've said, yeah, we just need you to be the installer. We've 12 months ahead. We've had parity in. We've appointed a coordinator. We've appointed a designer. We've had all the surveys done. Here's a tender docs. Off you go. For us, perfect. But we quickly find that the devil's in the detail, and the detail hasn't been pushed through. So three things every single job. Below DPC, what's the detail? Window junctions, are we moving windows into the insulation plane or not? Or do clients want to leave the windows in because they've only replaced them 3 years back? If we're doing that, then it's difficult, because part of a medium-term plan, really, you want to do all at the same time if you can, so you're not invalidating warranties and guarantees. And then eaves details. And the amount of times we're talking to clients and designers, so-called designers, haven't put enough design detail into these specific areas. And these are the key drivers that make or break the performance of a retrofit. So we're almost there. So how do you make your schemes more attractive? How do we get the supply chain engaged? Preparation. Get your stock data as good as you can. Use your internal teams where you can. Your stock. Get familiar with the terminology. Start with the end in mind. What are you trying to achieve? Are you chasing EPCs? Are you chasing heat demands? What is your plan? Or is it just we've got to get to EPCC by 2030 and 2031 someone else's problem? So 90 kilowatt hours is quite difficult. 50 kilowatt hours is almost too expensive and unachievable. So think about measures that are deliverable. So if you are doing wave 2 bids, think about measures that are appropriate and deliverable. So some cavities, some EWI, some heating, not just EWI to every property, because that's the critical path item. Trying to get a balance of easy wins, but not leaving all the hard to treat. Just be aware, EWI, when years ago, EWI was £50–60 a metre, now it's £200 a metre, plus your scaffolding, plus your window detail, plus your below drainage, plus your eaves detail. It's the EWI is the measure that seems to encompass all the other details. Be realistic on timescales. We're being approached, weekly. Can you come and do our wave 1? We've been let down. When's it got to be finished? End of March. Where are you? We haven't started nothing. You don't underestimate how long it takes to survey these properties and get the designs in place. Pilot properties are great. If you can do pilot properties, do them, but have you got enough time? Because, we're probably talking 8, 10, 12 week mobilisation period per property to get the designs in place, the designs that are required. Be realistic about your procurement routes as well. So if you're coming to market, have you already appointed a designer and a coordinator? Have you already got details in place? Or are you going to go down a 2-stage process where you're going to get someone on board and they're going to do like a PCSA, where you're going to appoint the contractor who's going to appoint the designer and the coordinator? Should the coordinator be a client appointment or a contractor appointment? But lots of things to think about. There are opportunities, not all bad news. The early slide from Jonathan shows all the economic and social and health benefits, but it's not just green jobs. There's a lot of upskilling to be done at all levels. Our site management, our resident engagement teams, our quantity surveyors, our estimators, the whole spectrum. It needs upskilling. But there's big opportunities for innovation, and what we're seeing now is things like insulated verges, insulated meter boxes, special thing below DPC are coming to market. So over time, products will come to bring the cost down and make these installs more deliverable. Right. Any questions? I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Carl. That was very interesting, and I think you've described the complexity of the supply chain in a lot of detail that we sometimes think you pass it on to a contractor and that's it, without thinking that it's called a supply chain for those reasons. We are running a little bit late. Happy to take one quick question then, and then we'll move on to Mark, our final speaker, and then we can take questions at the end. So, Cara, do you have a brief question, please?
I hope so. It was About external wall insulation versus internal wall insulation. In that, I always thought that it'd be easier and more affordable to do a whole terrace externally than trying to do each individual home. And some social housing are even getting difficulties accessing some of their housing to be able to do internal wall insulation, particularly looking at the disruption around kitchens and bathrooms. And I just wondered if we kind of looked at a whole terrace versus pepper potting internally, whether actually external wall insulation would be the better route.
Is that to you, Carl?
Sorry, Carl, what was the question? Sorry.
Just looking at, because you mentioned about pepper potting is obviously quite expensive and tricky, but you were kind of advocating more around internal wall insulation as opposed to external wall insulation. And in my conversations with social housing particularly, they're struggling to get even into people's homes to promote and advocate retrofit, but particularly the big concern is internal wall insulation when it disrupts things around sort of bathrooms and kitchens. Where are those people going to go while that work's happening? And so it just, in my mind, meant that looking at terraced external wall insulation as an example would be a better way of approaching retrofit. I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think what we need to consider is the type of property. You know, and one of the big things in retrofit is making sure you're using the appropriate measures. So if it's a solid wall, you know, is it a vapor open or a vapor closed construction, and that will probably determine what insulation you use and what you know, do you do external, do you do cavity, or do you do internal? Internal wall is a good measure, but it is more disruptive. If you can incorporate that within a kitchen and a bathroom install, it does make a lot of sense. And what we're seeing in central Birmingham, where we've got a lot of old Victorian terraces, we're having to do IWI to the front from a planning perspective, and then EWI to the back and sides. You know, so it's very much horses for courses. But the point I'm making is we mustn't just be obsessed about EWI, because IWI and other measures will make the projects more deliverable. And it's probably horses for courses and property by property sort of criteria as to what would be the most appropriate. And again, it's connectivity. If you're just doing the kitchen and the bathroom IWI, and you're not going to treat the rest of the house at the same time, then there's unintended consequences there of thermal bridges. So it's it is difficult, but I would just have an open mind really, and don't just be fixated with we're just going to do EWI or we're just going to do IWI, because the different ways to skin the cat.
Thank you very much, Carl. I think you've absolutely summarised the complexity of retrofit there very, very well. We're going to move on to our final speaker, Mark Cook, who's a partner at Anthony Collins, and is going to talk about his work working with local authorities, and also refer to procurement as well. So thank you, Mark. And you're currently muted.
I've just unmuted. That's the first thing. I'm going to try and share my slides as well now. There we are. And I'm going to go to slideshow.
I just
The problem I've got is that the bit on my laptop which I want to try and get the start of the slideshow is obscured by the stuff for the chat. So hang on, let me see if I can.
We can see that, Mark. It's not in presenter mode, but we can read that.
Okay. Oh, hang on, I've got a trick in my sleeve. Brilliant. I'm going to, there we are. From the beginning. There we are. I've done it now.
That's perfect, thanks.
Right. So let me just start with who I am. Okay, so I've been involved with public procurement for about 31 years and been involved in all kinds of regeneration projects and joint ventures. But in relation to all of this, most recently I've been involved in delivering contracts which have at their heart community benefits. And I'm going to give you an example of the wording used in relation to those kind of contracts, really just to start the debate about what is the subject matter of the contract, really. And then the second thing I'd say is that I've also been involved with colleagues on rolling out wave one of the social housing decarbonisation fund, but also the public sector decarbonisation scheme. And what I will reflect listening to both Jonathan and to Carl is that it is certainly the case that we are not helped by having these funds being stop-start and therefore not being a steady stream of monies flowing through. And particularly in relation to those big schemes, essentially it's worked best with local authorities and housing providers who essentially pragmatically use existing frameworks to get the work done within the timescales required. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the opportunity. So there is nothing at the moment, and therefore you're having to sort of twist and bend and shake around some of the frameworks which were not fit for purpose in order to make them work and taking them forwards. And that was particularly the case with the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which applies to public buildings. In order to spend the money within 1 year, you had to do some a fair bit of limbo dancing with existing partnership schemes, basically. So I start with that reflection because when I go on to my broader talk, one of the things which I would like to talk around, particularly picking up on Carl's detailed feedback on what makes a good procurement process and what's required in terms of taking things forward, and also picking up on Jonathan's point about creating a county-wide a retrofit strategy, which I applaud, is that I think that ultimately we may need to look at collaborating together to create the right kind of frameworks which can draw down the supply chain in the most flexible way possible in order to spend the money within the timescales the government is currently alerting to, but also to be ready for any future government, which does actually enable a more stable stream of funding to go through. Because I think it'd be powerful to say that if we were to get our act together on that front so that any local authority housing provider could go to the same place in order to get works on the ground, we would be in a good place to talk to BEIS, but also other government departments like DLUC about how we say, well, we've put an infrastructure across the social housing sector, whether it's in local government or in housing providers, which really does tick all the boxes which Carl was articulating from a large contractor's perspective, but also, I think importantly, also enables SMEs to play a full role as well, basically, because there's only so much one can do in terms of immediate works unless you actually have a program in place for building skills and capacity, and that has to be understood centrally, quite frankly, and I'm not sure it is. So that's my opening statement really about all of this, really. So here's a contract which reflects a session which you will have had earlier in one of your earlier rounds, which tells me, because I was introduced to this session because of a previous speaker called Aileen McDonnell from B for Box saying that I ought to come and speak. And here's a contract which talks about the underlying provision of services and works which are to achieve all those things, because ultimately the end of retrofit is actually to achieve a number of things which address climate change, but also give people a greater degree of ability to tackle things like fuel poverty, address inequalities, promote social justice. And those broader ends are things which all councils can sign up to, and actually all contractors which have got which are involved generally can do, particularly the large ones, but also a number of the SMEs, because they know that that ultimately is what matters. And then what I did in this contract was to say that the services and the underlying work seek to achieve primary aims through basically providing jobs and training, and those work streams actually enabled things to happen. So whether it's kitchens and bathrooms or retrofit works and installation being installed, it was a way of creating long life careers, and also travel to work average distances being as minimal as possible, which again in itself has an impact on climate change. The third aspect of this contract was to say that the underlying works for the authority would be provided and that pipeline would be guaranteed, but there may be other contracts which they're deployed on. And they said that therefore we were looking to provide a complete service to employ, train and accredit beneficiaries, and opportunity for work experience and training and accreditation, deliver the underlying works, quantify the social impact, and make every opportunity to target local employment opportunities wherever practicable. And so I simply say that that contract does exist, and is an exemplar of community wealth building, which is the jargon currently used, and it shows what could be done if you wanted to not just deliver retrofit but also increase capacity. So that's happened on a micro scale, I have to say to you, not on the scale which is actually where we are. But I pose that question because the challenge which I'd like to talk about is what is the subject matter of the contract, and that's something which both Jonathan and Carl have also got about. Carl very much from the technical perspective of pointing out that actually knowing your data, knowing the state of your stock, knowing the importance of actually having a medium improvement plan is very, very important. And equally, the role of Essex being a sort of coordinator and facilitator of pulling together all the programs. Those are two really important and valuable contributions, really. But I think that actually what is this all about and what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? A headline of an overall new framework which actually articulated that and which all local authorities could sign up to would be great, because I'm certainly hearing from the audience today that everybody's trying to do their bit on the local basis, and that's fine. But actually, there's a lot which could be done by collaboration between contractors and collaboration between providers, because the subject is massive. So here are some of the issues which I was going to highlight, which are mysteriously exactly the same as or very much overlapping with what Carl and Jonathan are talking about in terms of the right capacity. Have we got a mixed economy supply chain engaged properly, materials? But funding is fundamentally the main issue, which is difficult. The variability of funding for retrofit, relying on government subsidies, does not provide long-term partnerships because grant regimes are short-term and have to be sent quickly. How can we be creative with a single supplier framework or a more complex one, which enables lots to be brought together so as to produce a more consistent funding stream? And it's already been commented that there are a number of providers, housing providers, which are currently having to deal with the current crisis of the rent caps and where we're going on with all of that. And that is quite important in terms of engaging where we want to be, because I'm certainly aware that having had quite a number of housing associations and other providers go for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund Wave 1, a number are not doing so for Wave 2 because they are currently having to deal with the cost of living crisis. And therefore we have some very fundamental issues in which we want to address in that regard. One of my colleagues, when I said to him I was doing this session, said, oh, perhaps we could see how we could make retrofit make sense without grant by having a sort of benefit rest whereby the investor has a scheme in the area which would be based upon paying when they've got the benefit back, which sounds wonderful basically in terms of pay as you go. But I think what Carl will respond by is the cost and the magnitude of the task is too great to be able to engage in that kind of process if we're going to go down the line, really. So creating, I think, therefore, the framework whereby then the pipeline can be attached on a more proactive basis, I think is something which we certainly, I would like to look at and examine. So how do we get there? So my first question is, are the current frameworks or dynamic purchasing systems fit for purpose? A lot of them are set up for works and maintenance works and the like, but have they really been designed to take into account retrofit properly? And how do we run packages which focus on jobs and training to enable the wider capacity in the market to grow, so we move away from the issues which have been caused by Brexit? And how do we do it in a way which creates a big bang approach, which makes delivery of retrofit contingent on a much bigger ask across the board in terms of the industry working together? And how do we make the current cost of living crisis the opportunity to rethink procurement altogether and start again? Now, obviously, you've got the immediate issues of dealing with your current programs, but because there is going to be, I believe, a shortage of the funding necessary to make the impact which is required on a sustainable basis, and we have the cost of living crisis, I wonder whether we should be drawing stumps together now and saying, let's prepare for getting it right in 2 years' time. This is not the situation which we have in Germany, for example, where my daughter's just come back from holiday and told me that virtually every house she saw had got solar panels on their roofs, and it had become common practice for retrofit to be part of the daily lives there culturally in Germany. I think we are behind a nation like them. So what do we do to actually take things forward on that front? So do we have one framework, many lots, or do we have a single supplier framework? How do we establish collaboration between contracting authorities? How do we establish collaboration between contractors and the wider supply chain? And what does having a proper pre-market engagement mean in terms of a big conversation of what we should be achieving together? And can that be done by working together? And finally, a really important point which is coming through, which is this. There is going to be a new procurement act coming through. That is going to simplify the number of procurement procedures which are available. That will include something called a competitive flexible procedure, and that process will be easier than the demands and the detail of competitive dialogue or competitive procedure with negotiation, or the fact that restricted procedure, which is a two-stage process, doesn't allow enough in terms of the market engaging and talking in relation to all of this. And we think that that procedure, if we start planning for it now, will allow for conversations about nanotechnology and other likes to take place. So I've rushed through my session largely because, Richard, I was aware that we were slightly behind time, basically, and we can catch up. But basically, my challenge is there a way in which we actually might do things better by everybody present in this call getting together and saying, well, why don't we collaborate? Why don't we have a LRAP framework which ticks all the boxes so that we're ready? I know that that is not an immediate answer, but it's better to be prepared now than to keep adjusting in a fairly makeshift way, which is exasperating for Carl and challenging for Jonathan, and not easy for all the other participants in this room. So that's my challenge.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think it's very interesting that you spoke about the potential flexible approaches that can be available in procurement, which actually meet the aspirations of Jonathan's broader social expectations from the county council, and hopefully make it easier for people like Carl and his broad supply chain to actually engage. I guess I have a question: is collaboration is absolutely key, and sharing of ideas and intelligence is pretty important. Is there anything that you could share with the participants on this program in terms of some of your thinking that you showed, the micro scale contract that you developed?
Yeah, so that micro scale contract was frankly because this contractor B4 Box have housed their own college and trained staff on the ground, basically. But what it meant was that actually by having one or two contractors which did pretty much full training of people and acted as a college as such, that creates a supply of future employees for the larger contractors, and they can then move into the contractors. So when I talk about having different lots, I'm saying there will be some lots where you have one requirement in terms of delivery, which is pragmatic and follows the fact that you need to take skills where you can. But there may be other lots which actually are designed to build capacity in the marketplace, that long term, the focus on that is training. Actually, because they're being trained on the ground in the process, the quality does not necessarily suffer because they're learning the skills which are having to be retrofitted to the other contractors who are engaging and using staff who still need to be trained, really. So is the gap that different, really, in that regard? And I just wonder whether a more sophisticated process, which looks at an overall framework, but then sort of divides it down to a number of different streams so that the whole of the construction industry benefits by opening those opportunities, would be worthwhile looking at.
Thank you, Mark.
I saw Rosemary putting her hand up. I haven't seen Rosemary for a long time.
Rosemary.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, really good to hear you speaking again today, and good morning, everybody. We have been looking at SHAP with a procurement framework provider for several months now about what a future whole house retrofit moving to net zero neighbourhoods framework might look like. And as a result of a number of workshops, consultations, and other research, it seems that there is an ambition to try and move the industry forward to do what we need to do to scale up retrofit to high quality with long-term outcomes. But for all the reasons that have been discussed today, principally around uncertainty of costings and uncertainty of when we can create the commitment that will encourage the supply chain confidence to invest, that seems like it's a bit of a aspiration rather than a reality. And it might be that we need to do some intermediate steps to get along the way. So I just wondered how we actually move this forward so we can get to that really ambitious approach to procurement, but move things forward probably from what are mainly measures-based frameworks at the moment.
So I think the big issue obviously is materials costs and also labour costs based in that regard. And I personally would be interested in exploring, Rosemary, the extent to which we could get going something which is of that ambition, but recognises it is on current costs, because that's all you can do, but works in a mechanism for adjustment of costs as we go along on a basis which is acceptable to the industry and acceptable to the commissioning local authorities. And working, because you can set up a framework where, as long as you can extrapolate from scenarios set out what the matrix of financial impact will be, and then build in the adjustment process through there, that might be something worthwhile doing. And I don't think that is beyond the scope of co-creativity between the supply chain and the commissioning local authorities. So I quite like to be a little bit more brave than just simply saying, well, it's aspirational, but let's do what we can do intermediate. Let's build in those unknowns into the way we design the procurement process.
Can I just make two comments on that? I think one is that certainly where budgets are fixed within financial years, as they are for many social housing providers, it's really difficult to deal with a kind of price fluctuation or a price increase. Yep. And secondly, just the mechanism of getting sign-off for those price increases means that there's so much uncertainty about whether there will be a final outcome. So I'm not saying let's not be ambitious. I'm just trying to work out what are the initial steps that we could concrete in now in order to build towards what we want to be, that total sort of visionary approach. But yeah, thanks, Mark. And we are going to be looking at the business case that we put forward, not only about the immediate social value around jobs, but the much wider social value and social benefits that's created. So thank you.
Thanks, Rosemary. Any other questions for Mark, Carl, or Jonathan at all, please? Harry.
Hi there, morning. Harry Frost from Scarborough. A question, I guess, mainly for Carl, but I'm sure the others will chime in as well. It regards to sort of the difference in timelines in between what all the local authorities and contractors want in terms of a 5, 8, 10-year pipeline of projects versus the reality of what government gives us a 1-year contract, and then the training timelines that, as you said, I think Carl mentioned, like about 2 years for a good quality MVQ on a lot of this stuff. Obviously, we're quite limited in we're not able to do those 5, 8, 10-year things, and we're having to do the 1-year things. And as much as we're pushing government to allow us to do those longer term things, it's always a struggle. With Hug 2 having this 2-year delivery window just announced, it's a bit of a stepping stone. Do you see that as just about enough time to implement some of the training schemes alongside it? Or is this still not even close to good enough in your view, and would require us going away and pushing even harder for government to extend these schemes to longer delivery windows?
You're muted, Carl.
It's certainly better, and more time is obviously what we need. But it's you know, the wave 2 is going to be 2.5 years worth. Great, but we've still got to identify the scheme and understand what measures we need, understand what skills we need, then go and find these people for the course, and then put them through the course. And even if they've not finished the course by the time the job's finished, have we got enough work then after that contract to keep them gainfully employed? And that's where the pipeline is. And if clients can come back and say, irrespective of grant funding, irrespective of what comes, we're committed to decarbonisation our stock, then we can, with our supply chain and with our partners, we will go and find the jobs because we need them. But at the moment, it is difficult to try and give any confidence or commitment to individuals to take them on if you know there's not necessarily a job at the end of it. So yeah, we need these opportunities. We want to create these opportunities. We're obligated to provide these opportunities. But it's hard to find someone and say, yeah, we've got this job, but what happens after 2 years? Well, we haven't got a contract. So what will these people be doing? And that's the reality. So.
Thanks, Carl. It's a really tough one. It's just interesting that we hear the same challenges, but I think we hear the same aspirations as well. The same challenges are affecting everybody on this call from a supply chain perspective and a local authority perspective. And I am really pleased that we're hearing potential ideas of how this could be done. The ability to integrate all of the broader benefits that could be put into maybe a procurement process. So I am going to be pushing afterwards for any ideas. I'm not even going to call it best practice. It's almost just ideas that people have and any documents, any examples where we can share that, because I think collaboration and sharing of these ideas is absolutely critical in terms of moving from where we are now and the challenges, difficulties that affect everybody through to potentially working in a different way. We have a couple of minutes more if anybody wants to ask any other questions or comment on it. Actually, Adam has put a question in chat which says, "I'll call off strategic." Adam, do you want to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess, Carl, you're probably used to kind of every type of contract and partnership under the sun, and I'm just wondering if you could kind of indicate if there were any particular types of relationship that give you a bit more latitude in terms of, I mean, like understanding the fact that our own funding programs are often very much driven by the grants. Is there certain types of relationship or program or contracting that does tend to give you enough latitude to help build a structure? And where I sort of stressed strategic partnerships here is in the sense of, do you need, it's I don't know, £100 million over 5 years or whatever it is, but as the maximum, but with a minimum spend of X per annum, or can you actually just have a value of a relationship over a period of time?
I think it's more of the latter. It's knowing that there's work there for the duration of to fulfil the training obligation and then to keep them gainfully employed afterwards. On new build, it's quite easy to take on a couple of carpenters or a couple of bricklaying apprentices, and you could easily send them off to college and we could keep them on. We could move them around different sites, and we always know there's going to be new build schemes for them to go to. With this retrofit, because it's quite specialist, it's different, and because we're doing in pilots of 50 properties, 100 properties, there's not much longevity beyond that. So if we had some sort of 4 or 5 year arrangement, and then we could then find the right types of training. I mentioned in my slides, we're working in trying to put together a Lovell retrofit academy right now, where we can, and wouldn't it be good if we could go with a client and find a resident who's unemployed and get them a green job and work in their area? That's utopia. But we're trying to find what courses and where, and are they local to where the people live, and have they got wheels, and so it's where would the training be? There's lots of detail, but we all want to create these green jobs, and a longer term relationship will help create these jobs 100%.
Okay.
Thanks, Carl. Cara?
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to just sort of bring up the situation around some councils who don't have their own social housing stock, and the procurement thing is obviously one challenge, but how do we also be able to provide support for those who are kind of able to pay sector that can also help support bring down prices per materials and construction installations by combining, and I just wondered if there's been any progress looking at that kind of hybridized opportunity, and if that's something that we could look at collectively across councils as well to speed up the delivery of retrofit.
Is that to Carl or to everybody, actually, Cara?
Well, kind of everybody. I mean, we're talking about procurement processes, but that's mostly for what control councils have. And as a local authority, it doesn't have our own housing stock. It's difficult for us to kind of apply that. And I just wondered about how we create kind of hybridized opportunities that aren't just based on the low income homeowner, but can also be spread to neighbours who don't fit that criteria for government grants, but still want to do that. However, pricing, as we all know, is going up and makes it less and less accessible to a large swathe of the community. So just looking at ideas of how we can kind of bring those two together to enable delivery across all our communities.
Mark, do you have some examples? I think you were nodding to that.
I was nodding because I agree. But I think the fundamental issue is that a lot of homeowners are currently themselves dealing with wider issues in terms of cost of living crisis and affordability. Really, I'm not sure. I think it all boils down to even they will need support in terms of funding properly, and I'm not sure that we have got that. I don't think we have got that joined up program coming from government at the moment. Really. One can certainly promote projects and schemes which involve homeowners alongside taking part, but to do so, I think would have to offer a degree of clarity and certainty, which is proving difficult to achieve. Most people, when they have home improvements and they go out to builders at the moment, will get a labour cost, but they will not get a materials cost. Full stop. And so I think some good thinking could be done by local authorities strategically about how they can help with all of that by looking at all the different streams of funding available. But I suspect that the totality available at the moment, until we get some clarity from the government, and I would like to see, for example, the Levelling Up Fund results coming out from government, some confidence in terms of investment in locality basis, because it's like 3 months out of date now. I'm hopeful that Michael Gove will get back into the job and deliver, but at the moment there isn't enough confident persuasion coming from the UK government, but I would hope that would change when we've got a more stable and particularly as Michael Gove does own the agenda properly. So sorry, Cara, that's not answering your question, but nevertheless, I think that organising the local marketplace. I suppose one of the things you can do is sort of join it up so that SMEs and other organisations join up. Some SMEs might say, well, we're very happy to engage in retrofit, but we're finding PAS 2035 too expensive ourselves to engage with. So yeah, there's a big piece to be done, and happy to contribute to it all. But I think it's looking at all the different components on the ground.
Thank you very much. We are at the end of our time now. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Jonathan, Carl and Mark for some 3 very interesting, different, but also aligned perspectives on the role of the supply chain in the retrofit. I think we'll take a lot away from this, and I will keep on going about us wanting to build up a repository of information, ideas, any examples of where retrofit, the engagement of the supply chain, how that aligns to local authority broader aspirations, because it seems like we've all got the same objectives here. We just need to make sure that collaboration brings it together. So just while we're finishing, I'd be very grateful if you could put a word or 2 words on how you found this session, what you'll take away from it, any ideas. If you could just pop that in the chat, it'd be really useful to get your final feelings on that. And while you're doing that, just a quick say that what happens now is that we now get the next set of regional coaching sessions where you'll be back in your groups of local authorities, going through this in a very safe space and a place where you can share your ideas and share your examples, and and start to help you move on to the third round, which is about developing that relationships with communities, community organisations. I think that was one aspect that Carl said about how you engage residents to get residents warm and ready. So we'll be having a round of examples on that, and then finally through to the action plans. So any comments, thoughts, write down in the chat. It's been a pleasure with you today, and thank you again for 3 very interesting speakers and very, very relevant to our aspirations. So thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you in the coaching sessions.